Ethan had always wanted to visit New Orleans. He loved the history, the music, and the food. When he found a beautiful old house to rent for the week, he thought he had found the perfect place to stay. The house was large, with tall windows and antique furniture. The host told him it was over 100 years old. That made Ethan even more excited. The first night in the house was quiet. Ethan walked around, admiring the paintings on the walls and the fancy chandeliers. Everything looked perfect, except for the bathroom mirror. Something about it made him feel uneasy. Every time he looked at it, he thought he saw a shadow moving behind him, but when he turned around, nothing was there. He told himself it was just his imagination. The next night, things got stranger. As Ethan brushed his teeth, he noticed the shadow again. This time, it was clearer. It looked like a person standing just behind him. His heart pounded. He spun around quickly, but the room was empty. He laughed nervously. "Maybe I'm just tired," he whispered. He went to bed, but his sleep was restless. In the middle of the night, he woke up suddenly. His chest felt heavy, like something was pressing down on him. He tried to move, but his arms and legs wouldn't work. Panic filled his mind. He could barely breathe. It felt like invisible hands were holding him down. Then, in the dim light, he saw it, the shadow from the mirror. But now, it was standing at the foot of his bed. Ethan wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The figure leaned closer. It had no face, just darkness where its eyes and mouth should be. It whispered something, but Ethan couldn't understand the words. The pressure on his chest grew stronger. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the weight lifted. Ethan gasped and sat up, breathing hard. The figure was gone. He turned on every light in the room, his hands shaking. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Ethan decided to talk to the host. He described what had happened. The host's face turned pale. She hesitated before speaking. "I didn't want to scare you," she said, "but there's something you should know. This house, it was built on top of an old cemetery." Ethan felt his stomach drop. The host continued, "People say some of the spirits never left." That night, Ethan covered the mirror with a towel. He didn't want to see the shadow again, but it didn't matter. When he lay down, he felt the same heavy pressure on his chest. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to make it go away. A cold breath touched his ear. A voice whispered, "Get out." Ethan didn't wait for morning. He grabbed his bag, ran out of the house, and drove to the nearest hotel. He never looked back. Later, he learned that many guests had reported the same thing. Shadows in the mirror, pressure on their chests, whispers in the night. The house was known for its hauntings. Ethan had always wanted to visit New Orleans, but after that, he never wanted to go back. Jack and Emily had always wanted to escape the city for a while. When they found a beautiful old farmhouse for rent in the countryside, they thought it was perfect. The house sat on a hill, surrounded by trees, with no neighbors in sight. It was peaceful, or so they thought. The first night was quiet, but on the second night, Emily woke up to a soft crying sound. It was faint but clear, like a woman sobbing in the distance. "Jack, wake up," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. Jack groaned. "What is it?" "Do you hear that?" Jack sat up and listened. The sound was coming from outside. The wind blew through the trees, but the crying continued. It made Emily shiver. "Maybe it's just an animal," Jack said sleepily. "Go back to sleep." Emily tried, but the sound stayed with her. The next night, the crying returned. This time, Jack heard it too. He got out of bed and walked to the window. The full moon cast a pale light over the land. Nothing moved, but the crying remained. "We should check outside," Jack said. Emily hesitated, but she didn't want to be alone. Together, they grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The air was cold and the sound seemed to float around them. They followed it, walking around the house, but there was no one there. Finally, the sound faded away. Confused, they went back inside. The third night was the worst. This time, the crying didn't sound like it was coming from outside. It was inside the house. Emily's heart pounded. "Jack, it's in the closet." Jack turned on the bedside lamp. The closet door was closed, but the crying was coming from behind it. His hands trembled as he reached for the handle. "Wait," Emily whispered. Maybe we shouldn't. Jack pulled the door open. The closet was empty. The only thing inside was an old wooden rocking chair. It was slightly tilted forward, as if someone had just been sitting in it. But there was no one there. Jack stepped back. "I swear I heard something." Emily nodded. "Me too." They left the closet open and got back into bed, but neither of them slept. By morning, they were both exhausted. Emily suggested they leave, but Jack wanted to stay one more night. "Maybe it's just the wind," he reasoned. That night, the crying started earlier than before. It was louder, closer. Emily clutched Jack's arm. "I don't like this." Jack sat up. The closet door, which they had left open, was now closed. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, the door creaked open on its own. The rocking chair moved. Jack and Emily couldn't move, frozen in terror. Then the crying turned into a whisper. A woman's voice, barely audible, but full of sorrow. "Help me." Jack grabbed Emily's hand. "We're leaving, now." They grabbed their bags without packing and ran to the car. As Jack started the engine, Emily looked up at the house. In the window above, where the closet was, she saw something. A woman, pale, with hollow eyes, staring at them. Emily screamed and Jack hit the gas. The car sped down the dark road, away from the farmhouse. They never looked back. The next day, they called the owner to return the keys. "Why are you leaving so soon?" the owner asked. Jack hesitated before saying, "We heard something." There was silence on the other end. Then the owner sighed. "You heard her, didn't you?" Emily's blood ran cold. "Who?" "The crying woman," the owner said. "She lived there long ago, lost her child, never left." Jack hung up without another word. They never spoke of the house again, and they never stayed in the countryside again. Ben and Lisa had always dreamed of visiting Mexico City. When they found a beautiful colonial house on Airbnb, they couldn't believe their luck. The house was old but well restored, with tall wooden doors, colorful tiles, and a courtyard full of bright flowers. It seemed like the perfect place to stay. The first night was quiet. They were tired from their flight, so they went to bed early. But in the middle of the night, Lisa woke up. She heard something, soft crying, like a child sobbing. She shook Ben awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Ben listened for a moment, then shook his head. "It's probably a neighbor's kid," he mumbled, turning over and falling back asleep. Lisa wasn't so sure. The sound seemed to be coming from inside the house. She got up and walked through the dark hallway. The crying stopped. She checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked. Feeling uneasy, she went back to bed. The next night, the crying came again. This time, Ben heard it too. It was faint but clear, like a young child weeping. They got up and searched the house. The sound echoed through the halls, but no matter where they looked, they found nothing. "This is weird," Ben admitted. "Maybe we should ask the host tomorrow." The third night was the worst. The crying started earlier, just after midnight. Lisa clutched Ben's arm. "It sounds closer," she whispered. Then a voice whispered in the darkness, "Ayúdame." Lisa gasped. The voice was right next to their bed. Ben grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. The room was empty, but the air felt thick, heavy, and cold. The whisper came again, softer but urgent. "Ayúdame." That was enough. They grabbed their bags and ran out of the house. They drove to a nearby hotel and spent the rest of the night awake, their hearts pounding. The next morning, they contacted the Airbnb host. When they explained what happened, there was a long silence. Then the host sighed. "I was hoping it had stopped," she said. "Many years ago, a little boy lived there. He went missing one night and was never found. His mother said she could hear him crying, asking for help. People say his spirit is still there, looking for someone to find him." Ben and Lisa cancelled their stay and found another place to stay for the rest of their trip. But they never forgot the voice in the dark, whispering for help, forever lost in the old house. Would you stay in a haunted Airbnb? If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.